So welcome everybody. This is Trish Ewell from Owl's Ledge. I'm very excited. Today is our first episode actually of expert interviews with learning professionals from around the world. And I'm particularly excited today because we've got Wayne Turmel from greatwebmeetings.com. I've known Wayne actually for a few years now and am delighted that although Wayne and I run into each other at events all the time, especially in the ASTD community and with the ASTD chapters, but we are actually only, less than 10 miles from each other, Wayne, here in the Chicagoland area?
Google says it's 5, and I can count on one hand the number of times we've actually met in the same time zone.
That's right. That's exactly right. But at least we did it that one time. But so a lot of our experience of each other has actually been through social media, right in the in-between, and getting to know each other on different platforms like a little bit of YouTube, but I think mostly like Twitter. And as of late, really getting to know each other more on different platforms like Google+. And again, that's like the in between these in-person meetings that we've done, and only recently meeting for coffee actually out here in the Chicago in the suburbs. But I'm excited because the work that you've done for a really, really long time is about that, right? It's about human connection. It's about bringing people together for a variety of different reasons, whether it's in the analog world or especially your specialty is really in the virtual world. How do we connect people in formats like the one that we're using today? So tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about greatwebmeetings.com.
Oh, thanks, Trish, and hi, everybody. Greatwebmeetings.com essentially teaches communication skills, just the medium in which we work happens to be virtual. I'm a classroom trainer, 20 years being in the classroom, working with people, face-to-face communication, public speaking is my drug of choice. But over time, these tools, whether it's Google Plus or webinars or video chat, have become part of the context in which we do our work. And what's happened is a lot of really smart people have found themselves communicating through a technology they're not comfortable with, and as a result, they're either not using it or not using it well. And the ability to use these virtual communication tools is an absolutely critical part of being able to function in the 21st century workplace. If you are a manager, you need to be able to lead meetings and teach and demonstrate using these tools. If you're a trainer, this is going to be part of your repertoire. As I say, I'm a classroom trainer, man. That's always going to be my first love. But if you're feeling kind of constrained by these tools, and I've told Trish this before, the best day I ever had as a training consultant, I taught a class in London in the morning, one in Calgary in the afternoon, and one in Australia after dinner. Build 3 classes in 3 days and in one day and never left the house. That's a good day's work. So we need to start thinking about what these tools can do for us instead of looking at them as constraints. So that's why we teach communication skills that happen to be mediated by technology rather than, as some people think we do, just teach how to use WebEx.
Excellent. And you've got a brand new book that's out. That's called Meet Like You Mean It. And
yes.
It's a leader's guide for
Meet Like You Mean It. This is probably going to look backwards to you, but there you go. Meet Like You Mean It, a leader's guide to painless and productive virtual meetings. And essentially it's, we got to hold meetings. How do we do them using these tools in a way that work? Because 2/3 of, or when they study people, they find that people think 2/3 of the time they spent on web meetings is wasted.
Well, and isn't that even just a bad habit that we've taken from the in-person, from the analog world? I mean, we've got a lot of meetings where we're going into conference rooms that don't feel like they're managed particularly well. And you actually make an exception about that. You talk about that there's a difference between managing meetings versus leading meetings.
Yeah, well, it's like the difference between management and leadership. It's the same thing. I mean, first of all, you're right. I always laugh when people say, well, my web meetings are a waste of time and blah, blah, blah. And I go, really? Because how are your in-person meetings? And they kind of mutter and look at the floor and try to change the subject. So the good news is it's just meetings. Uh,
Right. Right.
and it's there's running the meeting is we start at 10 o'clock, we go through the agenda, and we get out and nobody dials 911 and nobody gets hurt. Um, that's running the meeting. Leading the meeting is prepping for it effectively, helping people be prepared, getting engagement, staying on task, achieving your outcomes. And if that sounds like a really good training session, that's no coincidence, because it's a lot of the same skills and mindset.
And so that you know what, that's a really good, that brings us into a really good space. And that is, as is often the case with any kind of performance, we often know what bad looks like, right? We know what we don't want to do, but oftentimes it's hard to then visualize or picture what good looks like, or defining success criteria. So what constitutes a good meeting, whether it's virtual or sitting, the in-person or real time?
Well, it's really not that difficult. I mean, if you set out your criteria, what's a good meeting? Well, it accomplishes what it's supposed to accomplish. It drives the work forward. It gets the right amount of input and engagement and participation, and then people go back to their lives and actually make use of what's happened in the meeting to drive the work forward. That's a good meeting. And whether it's in the conference room or virtually, or you've got 5 people on cell phones in various Starbucks around the planet, that's a good meeting, right? We make good use of our time. Did we accomplish what we want to accomplish, and did we drive the work forward? Full stop. Whether you used all the pretty tools, whether you all that is irrelevant to, did we do what we needed to do, and did we drive the work or the project forward? And that's what we need to focus on, is the outcomes, not on the process. And with webinars and those types of things, we tend to get hung up on process. And this is particularly true in the training world, where that's the biggest objection, is the process.
So tell us more about that. Like, how so? How is it the process?
Okay. I'm going to be a little irreverent here, and hopefully, I know that's so unlike me, and hopefully we'll be forgiven for this. But let's start with the assumption that nobody goes into training for the money. We tend to go into training because we're passionate about our subject. We like people. Most of us are terrible hams. We like being at the front of the room. We like the presenting. So if we think about what it is that we do and how we identify ourselves, it's all hung up in that live environment. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to take everything you like about your job. I'm going to take away the people. I'm going to take away the interaction and the sense of being on stage. I'm going to take away everything that you like about your job and make you use a technology that you're not very familiar with. I'm probably not going to train you on it. You're just supposed to magically figure it out. And we're shocked that trainers aren't going, oh, sign me up. When can I play with this?
Right, right. For doing like virtual instructor led. Right, right.
So the first thing you have to do is quit worrying so much about the technology and stay focused on what is it you're trying to do.
Okay.
We know what good learning looks like. So if I were to say to the people on this call, I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes. I want you to hold your questions till the end. I don't want you to talk to each other. Don't talk to me. Matter of fact, I'm not even going to look at you. How good a learning experience would that be? Well, the answer everybody knows is not very.
Terrible.
Now think about the webinars, for lack of a better term, or the VILT that you've been on. What are they? They're 1-hour sessions, 45 minutes, one-way communication. Save your questions till the end, no interaction, no nothing. That's not the webinar platform's fault. That's not the technology's fault. That's our fault as presenters and people who put the presentations together. As a matter of fact, what I tell people is, what would you do in the classroom? And then find the online corollary to do that. The challenge is that 80% of people use about 25% of the features, which means we're not utilizing the interaction and engagement that are in these platforms. Also, over 80% of people never get any training or coaching in how to use the tool. It's, here's your WebEx license, try not to hurt someone.
Right. Right. Or yourself.
So if all you've ever seen are lousy, boring, unengaging presentations that we know aren't facilitating learning, we're being asked to do something that we're unfamiliar with. And by the way, trainers are not really good at taking our own medicine. We encourage people all the time to stretch themselves and try things and work through the discomfort, but we tend not to want to do that very much. And then finally, we don't have a chance to get competent in a safe environment before there are innocent victims on the other end. Why are we shocked that there's so much resistance?
Right. Right. Absolutely. Where people come, right, and they experience something like this, and it doesn't go, to your point, it's not the optimum learning environment. People get bored. It's more of a push of content than really any kind of interactivity. It kind of violates every, sort of rule that we have out there about adult learning. And then, we're surprised when it drops, right? So you do more and more training sessions online, and you get less and less of an audience as time goes on.
I mean, there certainly are constraints, but, as a project manager, back in your deep, dark past, the constraints are not good or bad. They just are what they are.
Right, right.
Right? It's just, this is the environment in which we work. The problem is most people don't understand and haven't had a chance to get comfortable with the way to maximize the tools. A perfect example, I had a trainer say to me, "This is horrible, I hate it, you can't get feedback." Say, "Okay, so what would you do in the classroom at this point?" "Oh, I'd ask for a show of hands." There's a little button there that says raise hand, right?
Right.
Oh. I'd go to the flip chart. Well, there's a whiteboard, and as a matter of fact, as you know, Trish, in the book, I talk about this. The whiteboards in a virtual presentation platform are actually way better and more useful than the whiteboard or flip chart in a room. But we don't maximize it.
Right. Oh, absolutely. So whether you're using the virtual world and these different technology platforms for doing instructor-led virtual training, or being able to do meetings with project teams or status reports or whatever it is, in any of those cases, in any of those scenarios, we're not leveraging the technology. I mean, the same thing too with a meeting, the same thing whenever it is that we meet in the virtual world, right? The good practice would be pausing to allow other people to ask questions or contribute to the conversation. But it's almost like the minute the headset goes on, the blinders go on too. It's like the rest of the universe and all the other people go away.
Well, as you know, I'm the last qualified person to talk about neuroscience, but the fact of the matter is that there's a lot of brain chemistry that goes on. And it has to do with being in that state of, as many trainers know, there's the model of unconscious competence, competence, conscious competence, all of that good stuff. Most of us as presenters, trainers, meeting leaders, whatever, are in that state of unconscious competence, or conscious incompetence, I'm sorry. We're in that state of conscious incompetence where we don't really know what's going on, and so our brain is under stress, and when our brain is under stress, we try to limit the amount of input and stimulus that we're getting.
Right.
That's why, hold your questions till the end. Don't use the chat because it might be a distraction. We do all of these behaviors as a perfectly natural response to feeling under stress and out of control, which are completely counterproductive to what you want, which is engagement, action, building human relationships, all of that good stuff.
I hadn't thought about that before. That's a great point, that it really, so kind of being over your skis in this kind of an environment because of the things that you talked about before, lack of experience, lack of our own coaching or training and how to perform well in this particular format. I never thought about how that would really trigger like reptilian brain. I mean, that's exactly it, right?
It's totally reptilian brain.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's worse for trainers than almost anyone else because where is our comfort zone? Our comfort zone is being in the front of the room, being relaxed in front of people. Communication is our #1 skill as trainers, as a rule. Well, now our reptilian brain kicks in. We are consciously incompetent. We are a little freaked out, and the reptilian brain takes over. And that's the last thing that's going to be effective for us as trainers. I'll give you a perfect example. Think about the amount of multitasking that we do in the classroom on a regular basis, right? We're guiding our PowerPoints, we're scanning the audience for feedback, we're taking questions, we go to the whiteboard or the flip chart and we write things out and we facilitate conversations. And there's a lot going on. But because we're in the zone, because we've developed all the necessary muscle memory, we literally don't think about all that stuff.
Right. Well, and we also, there's an energy exchange, right? I mean, that we've, you know, especially as people who facilitate and started out live in classroom, we judge training goes well because we can feel like the energy, you know, we can guide the energy that's happening in the room with all of these other human beings interacting with each other and with us. And then also standing in a classroom, you know, the minute that energy goes flatline, like, you know, typically after lunch, you know, how do we do things in order to raise that energy up? But I mean, it's a startling, it's like a wall comes down, and you know, it takes skill and it takes practice and it takes experience as a facilitator in that moment to figure out how to raise that energy back up again, because otherwise we're really struggling. You can't let the energy flatline like that. And I think a lot of times when we wind up in this virtual world, it's almost like we're starting with that wall in place because we're cut off from the communication, not only the chatter of communication and hearing the human voices around us or people, you know, actually speaking with us, but then also just the body language, the, you know, all of those visual cues, making eye contact. It's like you're blind.
Well, exactly right. So we're stressed out anyway. And
right.
I don't know anybody, you know, in my work, I say this explicitly. I was on the phone with a learning director from a Fortune 500 yesterday, and she had never heard anybody say this out loud, but I was saying, of course your trainers hate this. We're performers. Our dopamine receptors go crazy when people laugh in the classroom, when they give us a, you know, when they put everything down and pay attention. You know, our reward centers go crazy. If you're not seeing that, if you can't hear people laugh at your jokes, if you're not getting that buzz from people, you are cutting off the #1 source of joy and
right.
thing that makes you happy. Now, all of that energy is going out. You're getting, or perceived to be getting, none of it in return. It's debilitating. That's why virtual instructor-led sessions need to be shorter. I was working with a very famous company, which will remain nameless because nobody should know they do this to their people. They had an online version of a class and a classroom version, and because of the way their LMS is set up, in order to get the same amount of credit, it had to be the same amount of seat time. So even though this class is 2 days in the classroom, they insisted it be delivered in 2 days virtually. And at the end of that, whenever I did one of those 2-day sessions, I was in a fetal position by the end of the day. I was in bed at 8 o'clock sucking my thumb because it was exhausting.
Right. Right, exactly, because you're doing the heavy lifting all the way through, and you're again,
not getting the rewards that keep you going.
Right. All of your senses, right? All of your senses that usually motivate you and energize you in those particular situations, right, are gone or just absent from that particular experience.
And so this resistance, some of which is for very good reasons. If you've never seen a good session and you've never seen one be effective, as a professional, you're reluctant to engage in that. It's taking away all the parts of the job that you like.
Right.
As a rule, particularly soft skills trainers tend not to be the most, he says, being kind, technically proficient folks. I mean, Trish, you and I are of an age, we survived the great PowerPoint nightmare of 1995 when every trainer in the world lost their mind. I was managing trainers at the time, and I had a PhD professor at Northwestern University look at me with a straight face and say, "You can't expect me to teach effectively in the classroom and use a computer. What's wrong with 35mm slides?" Well, if you've ever used 35mm slides in the classroom, you know that they're the work of the devil. They're horrible, painful things, but the stress of using a new technology
Right.
was sufficient to make this incredibly smart person just freak the heck out. And
Right.
that's where we are. I hate to use the word paradigm, but we are in the middle of that paradigm shift where we're being tasked to use this new technology, and we've just been tossed into the deep end. So it's no wonder that trainers and learner development folks and managers are struggling with this. It's not a surprise. What's surprising is the number of organizations that are just okay with watching people flail around.
Right. Right, because there's a cost. I mean, there are hard costs associated with incompetence. I mean, and that's really what it is. And when we're talking about training and we're talking about ineffective training, regardless of delivery format, we're talking about defects. I mean, if you're not improving somebody's performance with that particular type of learning intervention, then it's a waste of money, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of people resources, not only your trainers and your facilitators, but obviously the money that you're paying for the people to sit on their hands and have to take it. And that's one of the things that I really liked, especially in different parts of the book, Wayne, is you've done a lot of research in this area as far as the of man or woman hours that are involved in ineffective meetings and ineffective, training sessions. What are some of the costs associated with, how badly we're making this transition in some cases?
Well, let's just do a very simple ROI. You've got 5 people on your team and your meetings run an hour. So it's 5 person hours supposedly to run that meeting. $50,000 a piece is $25 an hour. Let's go with that number for the moment.
Okay.
So you would think that meeting costs you 5 times $125. And if 2/3 of that time is wasted,
right,
you've basically trickled away $90-something.
Right.
Now, it's worse than that, actually, because there's prep time associated with a meeting, whether it's physically getting to the meeting, preparing it, reading the documents, thinking about what you're going to do, so there's prep time. There's also whatever time you've put in, you need to double it, because as a matter of fact, there's a whole bunch of other work that isn't getting done if you're doing this. So the average 1-hour meeting with 5 people on a team, even with no commute time, loses a couple of $100 just on a regular basis. It's a $200 plus suck on productivity. Now, if that meeting doesn't work, what's the first thing that you need to do?
Meet again.
You need to have another meeting. You're now at 108. You're now at $1,800. I mean, the number grows exponentially, and that doesn't count demotivation. All of that stuff that goes on, and how bad meetings or bad conversations impact the rest of the work.
And is that one of the, so when you walk into some of these that whether it's training or whether it's meeting or however they're using these virtual platforms, and oftentimes both, right? I mean, they're using it, it's too costly of an investment to just be using it for, oftentimes for just one particular mode. How do you help people make the business case for improvement, for improving their performance in these virtual platforms?
Yeah, there's only so much hard dollars that you can do. I mean, you can do the ROI on a bad meeting, and that's simple math. Even I can do that. But that's not really the case. If you look at, and I've got a white paper on this if anybody cares, Gartner did some research called the hype cycle about the introduction of technology in organizations. You've heard me rattle on about this forever. And what happens is an organization says, that's it, we're not traveling, we're buying everybody Microsoft Lync licenses, or we're buying everybody WebEx licenses. And it rolls out and they expect, 85% usage for this tool. And it's actually about 10 or 15. They roll it out and it falls flat. Nobody uses it. There's a hard cost there. Right, in terms of wasted money. Just right there. If you've got 15% of people using something, you're already losing money. But it's more than that. People aren't getting the productivity that's anticipated. I mean, yes, you've slashed their travel budget. Congratulations. Now they get to be completely ineffective and never see each other.
Right.
Well
Right.
done.
Right.
Uh,
Right. Well, and I do an overlay. So there's Gartner's hype cycle, right, which is that introduction of the technology where
right.
it goes from, what was promised to the, what is it, the well of sorrow, to finding out what
This
it
is the
actually
best
does.
consultant language ever. You start with, what you think is going to, what was promised.
Right.
You immediately hit, and I love this, the trough of despair.
Right. Right. Yeah.
That some consultant actually waxed poetic about this,
Right.
because you go from this to the to the trough of despair, to the plateau of performance, which is at some level enough people are using it, and so it kind of levels off. But that trough, the depth to which it goes and the amount of time it takes to reach the next plateau,
Right.
is completely lost money, lost productivity, frustration, poor performance, all of that good stuff.
Yes, exactly. And I actually have an overlay from a change management standpoint of so you've got the Gartner hype cycle, because that next plateau is the plateau of productivity. So,
Right.
the promise of the productivity in the beginning of the implementation of the tool, whether it's, virtual online training, or, virtual meetings, or any other technology that's introduced into the enterprise. But you've got the, what was the promise, and then all the way down to, like you said, like the well of sorrow. And then, by the time you even get to the plateau of productivity, the comparison is that it's really here rather than what, was anticipated or promised or expected at the beginning. And that delta, there's a serious cost there, but not only the hard cost of implementing technology that doesn't get adopted, but then also the cost of the ding on performance and productivity, because while you're in that barren land going from what was anticipated to actually getting to some levels of productivity, that's what change management from a technology standpoint is all about. How do you accelerate through that dip, and how do you take people so that that dip isn't so severe? And that's what we're doing with our training initiatives and our meeting initiatives by introducing this technology when it's not managed, right? When it's not managed in a particular way, is that we're forcing that dip to go deeper, and we're spending more time, kind of in that, barren wasteland that it is before people actually get to productivity. But
Well,
yeah.
and there's a 3-beer conversation about this. And by the way, I don't know a single training professional who hasn't had this conversation, assisted by beverages or not. We're at the mercy of accounting. Okay? The cost of if we say we're going to reduce the amount of in-classroom training, there are instructor costs and training costs, travel costs, which show up at the bottom line. That's 5 less airline tickets we have to buy. It's 5 less nights at a hotel. That's easy money to show. It's really hard to show the hard dollars on, was the training worthwhile? Did we accomplish what we were going to accomplish? So to say we need to invest X amount of money to upskill our trainers to maximize this tool,
Right.
is really hard to have a conversation with the guy looking, but look how much airline travel we saved.
Right.
Why would I want to invest another $4, $5, $10,000 in skilling up our folks when we've already saved all this money?
Right. Well, and then to me, but then that's where I go into. So the overlay that I have in Gartner's hype cycle is actually the mourning process, right? So that's it. People in change management, when you take away something and give them something else, they mourn the loss of. And
that's part of the emotional. That's part of the emotional component that I was talking about. Is with trainers, it's particularly strong. We're particularly mourning. This isn't just a process. This is how we view ourselves that's changing.
Well, not only for us, but then also for the participants, for the learners as well, right? So, I mean, they used to be able to go to these in-person training events. They used to be able to socialize with each
Yeah,
other. There was a networking component. That's always been huge, right? And still is huge to give people that bonding time, that face time. So, in making a case for upskilling your trainers, in making a case for, having some managed transition or leading that transition from, especially from instructor-led in-classroom in-person over to leveraging these virtual instructor-led technologies, in making a case for that, what I do is go into the business and look at what is the business using for the salespeople or the engineers or the manufacturing or what have you that actually calculates out their performance and productivity. And then the calculation that I make to make the business case on why they need to invest the time, the money, and the training in managing this process really comes from, going back to the accountants, right, is how do we then prevent too severe of a ding on those performance and productivity measures that the business is already using. So I'm not talking about learning professionals going out there and recreating the wheel. I'm talking about there's a cost in a rise in defects. There's a cost in a lack of, performance and productivity in a particular population. And then how do you calculate that out into money, right, to make sure that then you've got a comparison there?
Right. Well, let me share with you an experience from one of my clients, a big Fortune 500 here in Chicago. The first exposure that most people are having to seeing these tools used effectively is in training.
Right.
It's the first time they see this used. And if they see it used well, they see the possibilities for their own environment. Hey, we could use this for our meetings, blah, blah, blah. If they see it used poorly, that's going to reflect to whether or not they actually use the tools on the job. No, they're boring, they're horrible, I hate them. So what we're discovering is when managers are in training and they go, hey, that's really cool, how did you do that? They're already seeing the application to, I can use this on the job. It actually has a ripple effect across operations that is really hard to quantify, but I can tell you, I know that it happens.
Well, and that goes into the investment in the IT architecture or the learning technology, the learning architecture, right? That goes into putting in that kind of an infrastructure and paying for the ongoing support, maintenance, or licensing of that particular tool is by driving adoption. That, it's not just a slam, and no one uses it. It's actually, it's now become part of operations where it becomes the go-to tool that people can't live without. And that's a good investment. Otherwise, it's a cost.
Well, absolutely, and it ripples. Let me give you a simple example, the use of webcams. There are still organizations that ban webcams. We don't let people use them. We don't encourage our people to use them. And when people participate in an online training session, for example, where they're allowed to see the other people in the class, and they realize how much that impacts the communication and their experience, they're often eager to go back and say, hey, why can't we use webcams with our teams? And the fact is, we're running out of reasons. Bandwidth is better. You don't need special equipment. You don't need a $100,000 telepresence holodeck screen to have a conversation with your coworker in Dallas. And as a matter of fact, it's harder now to find a laptop that doesn't have a camera in it than one that does.
Right.
You're actually going to more trouble to restrict people from using these tools than actually getting them to use it.
Right, exactly. And for the better. I mean, for the good of all. So I think Mark's got a question. I think he's going to come up on his mic here.
Thanks, Trish. Appreciate it. Wayne, thanks so much for doing this. This has been great so far. And I had a list of questions, and as usual, what seems to happen is they are answered ahead of time. So everything that you've covered in terms of what constitutes
audience analysis, Mark.
I know what constitutes a good meeting and use of features and immediate feedback covered all those. So I guess my question is for our group here where I work with and the team that I manage. Virtual meetings are what we've been running, obviously, and the value of a producer. Because again, if we're putting together maybe a 30-minute, 45-minute quick, LVC on some content that we're being asked to train, and we don't have, a 6 or 8 week period of time to develop something, but it's rather quick. So what's the value of having a producer, which certainly I understand in these, and how does the trainer play that role if we don't have time or the resource of using a producer?
Wow, there's a couple of things that you've just addressed there. So I'm going to try not to go too deep into the weeds because, I did a whole session at the last ASTD on helping subject matter experts do webinars, and the number one thing you can do is take away the technology as a distraction. So if you are in a position where you are co-teaching or you have somebody who can run the technology while you're presenting your information, of course that's going to help you be more effective. If I'm trying to run the technology, ask the question, listen to the answers, type on the whiteboard all at the same time, and I haven't developed the muscle memory to do all that, I'm going to have a stroke and die. My brain is just going to explode. It's too stressful. If somebody else is doing that and I can focus on leading the discussion, I'm going to be much more effective. Now, let's talk about the real world. Some organizations actually have things like budget to allow you to do that. Other organizations do not. It's a one-person class in the classroom, and by golly, it's going to be a one-person class.
Right.
At greatwebmeetings.com, all of our classes are one instructor programs. We don't have a producer. The instructor runs the class. Partly that's the nature of the class. We keep the groups very small and it's manageable, and plus, we know what we're doing. But here's the thing. Even if you don't have a producer as such, one of the things, and I talk about this at great length in the book, is sharing permissions so other people can serve this function. If we're going to lead a whiteboard discussion, there's no law that says, as the meeting leader, I'm the one that has to type the stuff on the board. I can say, Rob, would you do this for me? Mark, would you type on the board while I lead the discussion?
Right, just as you would in a classroom, you'd ask somebody to
exactly right. Again, we're back to
the classroom, right? And then another thought, though, that you gave me from this again is would be a great way to skill up the trainers. So let's say we had 2 trainers working together. Hey, you know what you're going to do? You're going to be the producer on this. Yep. And if I'm the producer enough over time, hey, guess what? Maybe I can walk and chew gum at the same time over a period of time.
And it only takes about half a dozen times.
Right.
This is the amazing thing, is that we view that hurdle as so huge that we have to get over. In fact, it only takes about half a dozen times for our brains to stop screaming at us. We can actually focus, and then we're capable of, as you say, walking and chewing gum at the same time. But if you don't get those half a dozen opportunities, if you don't get to practice in a safe environment, if you don't get to do it where you're only focused on the technology and not on the learners, when else are you going to develop those muscles?
Right.
And it seems like such an obvious thing, and yet, how many of us have ever actually been, how many of us are in environments where we have to ask permission to get onto the WebEx site or whatever it is? You know what I mean? We have to set up an appointment to get on it, to practice. It's taking time away from the 180 other things we're doing. We just don't do it, and it's insane, because the faster you get that practice in, the faster you can be proficient and really get the most out of these tools. The other thing is, in terms of meetings, you mentioned skilling up the trainers, and that's great. But what is our job as leaders, not managers, but leaders? To develop the skills of our people. So if over time I change, everybody on my team will be the producer at some point during the meeting. What have I done? I've engaged them kinesthetically. I've started to develop those skills. They now become comfortable with the tool, and what are they going to do? They're going to use it because they can. And so it serves both a leadership in terms of delegation, in terms of building skills, and by the way, it helps you be more productive. That's a really good deal.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I think just another quick thing on that with the producer and the moderator role, we do it, the Owl's Ledge sessions that we do for CPLP certification every week, the moderator or the producer also plays another role. They become the Ed McMahon to the Carson. So that person not only helps to take care of the technology issues and then also monitor the chat while the facilitator facilitates, but that person also has responsibility in gauging that energy level and making sure, especially when you're working with audiences that are not used to the virtual environment or are used to virtual environments where it's a very passive presentation mode and you're trying to, train them on how to interact for the first time, like that other person, the moderator, then becomes the model that other people can follow.
Well, there are not only great practical reasons like that, there are some hidden reasons that are extremely powerful in having that two-presenter model. One of them is very simple. People tend to tune out over time. If I'm listening to the same person, even if they're really interesting, over time my email becomes fascinating, my brain starts to wander. But human beings are like raccoons, right? Sound, color, light, and motion gets our attention. So when the speaker changes, we automatically re-engage. As a speaker, if I talk uninterrupted, especially those of us who really enjoy the sound of our own voice, which I know no trainer other than me ever does.
No.
But when you get on a roll, you actually get on a roll. You start to speak quicker. You're not checking the chat. You actually pick up momentum. By building that other person's interaction into it, we're going to talk about this piece of information, and then we're going to stop, and we're going to check for questions, or I will ask the next question that sets the speaker up. That is hugely powerful in pacing your presentation, in keeping people engaged. All of those other things, which are almost, they're not cynical, but they're an important part of the learning experience, happen when you build that in.
And so if you don't have a producer or moderator, again, you can leverage the participants themselves, right? So, and even set that up ahead of time. You can speak with people ahead of time who maybe have more of a level of comfort of being able to contribute and interact. People have different philosophies on this. I don't tend to call participants out. I give people space and silence to allow them to step into the interaction, and I'll wait, but I won't necessarily just, actually call on somebody specifically and put them on to contribute.
Now, you and I differ about this a little bit, and we've had this conversation, but here's my take on that. First of all, if you keep the group small, and in training, my rule is you don't have one more person in an online session than you'd have in the classroom. So if you would normally have 10 people in a class, that's how many people you have online, because you want to give people room to have that interaction. You also have multiple ways to participate. And this is very true in international groups or places where English is a second language, where people aren't always comfortable speaking up, even if they have something to contribute. So online, first of all, it's okay to set the condition where I may call on you. Now, I'm not going to put you on the spot by asking you a question that you can't answer or do something else, but I'm going to include you. So I'm going to say, Trish, what is your opinion about this? You have an opinion, right? I'm not going to put you on the spot. But the other thing is, online, we have multiple ways to communicate. So one of the problems with conference calls, for example, is you hear the same three people all the time. And they're not always the people you want to hear from. But using these tools, people can contribute in chat. If I have English as a second language, odds are my written English is better than my spoken English. So rather than discouraging chat, why wouldn't you encourage people to actually think about what they're going to say, write it down in a coherent fashion, and contribute that way?
Oh, that I do. So
but even calling on people, it's what are the rules that you set up front? Do you set an environment where that's an expectation? And I will often send people a chat message and say, hey, Corey, you were on that call. I know this is a concern. Would you mind if I called on you? So you can use the technology to kind of grease those skids. Some of it is using the technology effectively. Some of it is just your facilitation approach. And right at the very beginning, you will be called on. You are expected to contribute. And as a professional, I am not going to put somebody on the spot. And I'm not afraid to hold people accountable, especially in meetings where we're paying you for your brain. Right? We're not paying you to sit there and answer your email while we talk. So as a manager, I need to somehow hold you accountable for your participation and your input. Now, it's also accountable to me as a manager not to be a jerk.
Right.
And that's a facilitation skill.
Right.
So I'm a little more assertive about calling people because I've set the expectation that this is what's going to happen.
Well, I love that, because you do that in at the start of all of your courses. You have here are the rules of engagement, and here's what the expectations are going to be, and that's a best practice that we should all adopt. And I'm sitting here shamed into reminding myself after watching you in yet another session that we should do that. We should do that better. On the Owl's Ledge side. But I think you brought up a really good point, which actually showed just a little bit of a difference, and that is, there are some facilitators that'll call on somebody in a training session to make them participate vocally on the audio bridge. That I don't like. But calling on people and have them participate in the chat or participate that's fine. And having that different level of interactivity, absolutely. Because Mark actually just brought up a great point. And that is, something that you just said as well, Wayne, and that is, in some cultures in other parts of the world, especially with English as a second language, there are some people who aren't as comfortable in their spoken English, but their written English is awesome, and they're happy to contribute in that particular way.
Yeah. Well, and this is something shameful for North Americans in particular. We are incredibly insensitive to people with accents. And so when somebody wants to speak up and all they hear is, "I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't get what you said. Would you try that again?" It kills their desire to participate.
Yes, absolutely, right, exactly. Because now you've threatened them. I mean that's really what's happening.
Why would I be exposed to looking like an idiot?
Right, exactly. And we wouldn't do that in the classroom, so why would we do that with the technology? So speaking of technology, I think Corey's got some questions about technology, and Mark's got some questions about technology too, but I think we're going to bring Corey's mic up first. Hi, Corey.
Hello. Hi, yes, I just wanted to first echo what Mark said a moment ago. This has also been a very helpful conversation for me so far, and just piggybacking on the question about technology, Wayne, you mentioned we're kind of running out of excuses not to use this platform because the technology and bandwidth are constantly improving around the world, but in my part of the world, particularly, bandwidth is still a huge problem, and access to technology is a problem. So I'm curious, when you've had sessions where you may have been dealing with, like for myself, here I am in the Philippines, you're dealing with participants that have mixed technology capabilities. How do you plan for and compensate for that?
Yeah, well, and you've said two things, and there's two components. First is planning, and then it's compensating for the reality. First of all is audience analysis. What is their environment? So, for example, we just are completing today a 7-part webinar series with participants from 3 different countries, one of which is South Africa, and things like being able to dial in is a problem. So we have activated their mics. So in a perfect world, they can dial in. If they can't dial in, they can get in using the VoIP or their computer. So some of that is planning. We don't use webcams a lot. I'll turn on the webcam at the beginning of the class to say hi. Maybe we'll turn it on during Q&A. But video sucks up a lot of bandwidth. So I wouldn't leave the video running the whole time that class is going, because it does suck up bandwidth. And so a lot of it is audience analysis. Do I know who's in the class? Do I know the environment in which they're working? I work a lot with sales teams, and at least half of them at any given time are dialed into the audio, but they're sitting in an airport lounge or a Starbucks somewhere. And so they have to keep their phones on mute. Right? So you need to plan that as part of their, we need to plan that as part of the thinking. How are we going to interact? We aren't going to have somebody else write on the whiteboard if bandwidth is an issue, because frankly it doesn't work very well.
Right.
So that's the planning piece. The compensation piece is so what? Right? If they are having bandwidth problems, are we recording the meeting or the training so that if they miss it or they drop, they can go back and view it? Are we taking care to acknowledge that, you know what, Trish is in the airport and she's constantly being interrupted by announcements, so we're going to trust that she's listening, and I'm not going to call on her because it's a completely horrible situation. And it's distracting to everybody else. So some of it is planning in advance. What are the circumstances under which we're going to be able to interact and hear people? And then during the call, are we comfortable making that adjustment immediately based on the circumstances? And I would again submit, if you're uncomfortable with the technology in the first place, you're going to be really uncomfortable making those adjustments.
Well, and this is, in this right now, I mean, what we're experiencing with the bandwidth with Corey in the Philippines right now, I mean, we're seeing this on, this conversation today, that we've got, different people's access and people's resources, depending on where in the world they are, and their internet connectivity and so on and so forth is affecting, what's happening with this particular broadcast. So, but one of the things that's really, that we've seen a change on the Owl's Ledge side with the CPLP courses is, it used to be that with these virtual platforms, people were tethered to a laptop or a desktop on a desk, right? And now we've got people that are not only in airports, but we've actually had CPLP candidates that were in their car while their spouses were driving. The kids were in the back seat watching, DVDs and videos, and they're doing a move from one part of the country to another. And they're participating on a mobile device in a virtual training environment. So now we get a lot of candidates too that, instead of being at home or being at the office, they get better bandwidth at the local coffee shop. So now you've got people that are just kind of roaming around with these devices that could be participating from anywhere in all kinds of different types of environments. And how do you plan for that? But I think the mitigation strategies are the same, regardless of the specifics of that particular person's experience. The point is, put together a mitigation plan, do your audience analysis, have an understanding of how people are participating in that offering, and then plan accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely.
That makes sense. So speaking of planning and being able to leverage the technology as well, I think, Mark, do you have a question about, you were bringing up something in the chat here about breakout rooms?
Yeah, Trish. Well, so when we were talking about, setting up expectations and rules of engagement, one of the functionalities that we've attempted to use in the past, and I wouldn't say very well, has been, the use of breakout rooms when you're trying to run activities. So I guess the answer you're going to give me on this, Wayne, is probably, well, it's just like the classroom. Again, use the same design and whatnot to build those types of sessions. Anything special that we should know or put in place or be aware of when it comes to breakout rooms now versus, in the past they were very much audio driven in old technology. Now obviously we have the opportunity for video.
Okay, so breakout rooms, this is kind of a tricky thing, and in the book I give them very short shrift because the technology isn't quite there yet to make it seamless. Okay. Some of the more expensive, higher-end platforms actually allow for breakout groups, and trainers go crazy. They go, yay, because in the classroom we do a lot of small group work, and so this allows us to do the same sort of thing with that small group work. And it does, I suppose. It's still really clunky. They are primarily audio-driven. In WebEx, for example, the webcams don't work in the breakout rooms.
Okay.
Depending on, and I'm just picking on them. In Adobe, for example, they work great if everybody's on the computer. If you're dialing in on a phone, it gets really complicated to get audio
Right.
to the room. So there are three things, I guess, that you need to think about breakout rooms. First is it going to work? I mean, given your audio setup, given the attention of your audience, is the value you're going to get from those small groups in those breakout rooms sufficient for the pain in the neck it's going to be? So is it going to work? Can you actually make it work is number one.
I think we have the technology to be able to do it internally to make that happen.
So then the next question is, do the people know how to do it? And I've never been on a session for the first time where you're using breakout groups and that first session wasn't a car wreck.
Right.
It's not intuitive. I don't care what platform you're using to use breakout rooms. So you need to build into your timeline time to, I want to show you how this works. Let's do it once right, and then we can use it over and over again. So for one session classes, for example, breakout rooms are more trouble than they're worth to me.
Right.
If you're going to be doing over time and it's the same group of people and the first time you teach them how to use it, now it's less hassle as you go forward.
Okay, good.
So is it going to work at all, number one? Number two, do the participants know how to use it, and do you have the time to teach them how to use it effectively? Otherwise, number three is it's going to eat up a lot of time, and the value of it, I find most small group work in classes busy work and annoying.
Got it. Yeah.
And so because at Great Web Meetings we keep our classes to 10 people, it's very easy to take that small group work and make it a well-facilitated whiteboard exercise, for example.
Right.
Or ask people to chat with a partner and then come back with an answer and take 2 minutes instead of 10 minutes for the exercise.
It almost seems like breakout rooms were a function of old technology. Now that we have what we have, we may not even need to use them.
Yeah, breakout rooms are a function of, he says this delicately, somebody complaining about it. Somebody said, I wish we could do the small group discussions like we do in the class. Rather than examine our learning plan, our learning objectives, and saying, is there an alternative to this small group work?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody, to shut up somebody else, said, fine, we'll design it. But it has its limitations. Now, I've seen it work well when people are familiar with the technology, when they're comfortable with each other, when the learning is well designed. I have seen it work well. More often than not, especially with a new person leading the session, it's a lot of trouble. If you don't have a producer, it's a pain in the neck to run breakout sessions.
Okay.
So,
thank you, Wayne.
You know, that's my take on it. It's doable, but you need to really think about the value it's bringing.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I've found with those breakout sessions too, with the technology, like you really need a producer or a moderator for that, because like in Illuminate or Blackboard, like that particular platform, just as an example, like you need somebody to grab people and actually put them into their individual breakout rooms and then break them out and then bring them back into the main room again, and that's difficult to do if you're trying to facilitate and tee up, right? Do what we do well as facilitators, do the introduction of whatever the activity is going to be. So yeah, I would say if you're going to leverage those kind of tools, then you definitely need that number two person who's just, you know, really making sure to monitor that.
Yeah, because in the classroom, you can kind of eyeball which groups are in trouble, who's doing what. You actually need to physically, and I guess you're not physically, you're metaphorically, entering each group separately in order to evaluate, make sure they're on track, all that stuff that we do in the classroom. And you're only with that group. You can't see what's happening in the others. Whereas in the classroom, you can hear if somebody behind you is having trouble or where. And oh, by the way, in the classroom, as long as everything's going fine, you can go and prepare your flip charts or load your next set of slides. You can't do that. You need to be really involved. So teaching using So teaching using it is complicated. This also speaks to a whole other issue, which is when you're converting content, does it make sense to literally, whatever we do in the classroom, we're going to find a way to do that exact same thing online? And the answer is probably not. It's lazy course design, frankly.
Right. Right. But it brings up a good point, and that is, break things up. I mean, so whether it's breakout rooms but it's, different activities, whether it's whiteboarding or discussion or question and answer, and there's a number of different ways that you can do that, leveraging the bells and whistles in a particular technology. But then even just doing things that, even just doing things we do in the Owl's Ledge classes and the Saturday morning classes that we do, the 90-minute sessions, we do a break. We do an actual break.
Yeah.
It is a bio break. People and I love it. I forget who I got this from, but it's a one function break. Did I get that from you, Wayne? It's a one function break.
I'm stealing it.
So a one function break is you get to go to the restroom, or you get to check email, or you get to whatever, but it's one function. But we also do stretching. So we actually have people get up out of their chairs and do breathing exercises, and we do that in the context of helping people prepare for the CPLP knowledge exam. It's a good habit for them to get into the habit of, but just to break up sitting in a chair for long periods of time. So, yeah. And speaking of, we've been sitting in chairs for a long period of time. So Wayne, I really appreciate everything that you've done today and the conversation, and I appreciate our VIP audience members actually tuning in from different parts of the world to be able to ask their questions and to participate live from within the Hangout. So, my big question for you, Wayne, is as we begin to wrap just for today, what's the one next step that we should all take in order to meet like we mean it?
Wow. I think it all goes back to form follows function. So if you're going to meet like you mean, why are you meeting? Can you really define the purpose, the desired outcome, what's expected of everybody? How are you going to use the tool? And that all has to do with planning and setting the preparation. If people come in and they know why they're there, they know what's expected, they know what's supposed to happen, they know what's expected of them, and there's a better than average chance they will be held accountable for that, you're already halfway there, because if people's heads are in the right place, you have an actual shot at achieving what you're going to do, whether that's a functional meeting or a training. If people are distracted by the technology and they don't really know why they're there and they think they can answer their email and put the phone on mute, if they're not focused and engaged, they're not going to learn.
Right.
So everything starts with, before you ever fire up the platform, do you have any concept of what you're trying to achieve and how you'll do it? Once you've given it that thought, you're halfway there. Now all you have to do is execute, and that's muscle memory.
That's excellent. Well, thank you. Thanks again, everybody, for your time today. Yay, cake. I think we're good.